Hey there, groovy fifth graders. This is a little decimal review, focusing mainly on kind of understanding place value with decimals. We're going to do some rounding, going to do a little adding and subtracting, and hopefully that's going to help us feel a little more confident in what we do with our decimal numbers. So let's start with rounding decimals, and let's say we need to round a decimal to the nearest tenth. In our brains, we might want to see one of these things. We might want to kind of have a kind of a place value chart. And if we're not ready to just have it in our brains, we might want to sketch one out on paper or use one that's provided for us. Let's say we have a number like 7 and 67 hundredths, and we need to round to the nearest tenth. Then we're going to have to say to ourselves, okay, if I'm going to round to the nearest tenth, rounding down would go to 7.6, rounding up would go to 7.7. I could even draw out a number line of that. Well, how do I know which one to choose? Well, I look to the right, don't I? And I see, well, there's a 7 there. That tells me that I am more than halfway between these 2/10 numbers, more than halfway to the higher number. If I'm closer to that higher number, then I'm going to round to 7.7 or 7 7/10. All right. So let's say we use this same logic for the number 14 and 219 thousandths. So this time let's try picturing that place value chart and saying to ourselves, okay, ones or tens place, ones place, then there's my decimal, 1/10ths place, hundredths place, thousandths place. And I know I'm rounding to the nearest tenth. So again, if I'm going to let it rest, the nearest tenth down is going to be 14 2/10. If I had to let it soar, if I had to go to the nearest tenth up, 14 3/10 is the nearest tenth up. Now the question is, where on my mental number line does 14 and 219 thousandths fall? Is it closer to 14 2/10 or closer to 14 3/10? Well, let's take a look at the next place value over, and I see we've only got 1/100th in that place value. Well, 1/100th isn't going to take us very far away from 14 2/10. It certainly isn't going to get us halfway or more, and that means that 14 2/10 is the number that we would round to the nearest tenth. Now remember, it doesn't matter how long this number is up here. If we're rounded to the nearest tenth, then our rounded number ends in the tenths place. I'm not going to do some business like this. No, because there I've got a thousandths number, and it might be equivalent, but it isn't the same if we were to say draw it out. I hope you're enjoying the noises of my broken dishwasher in the background. So concept and see if it plays out with rounding to the nearest hundredth. So here we have two numbers, and we've got to round to the nearest hundredth this time. We need to keep that in mind. Again, we either want to use a place value chart, or we want to kind of push our brains to stop and think about the place value of the number before we proceed. If my number is 1 and 823 thousandths, and I need to round to the nearest hundredth, then that means, again, on that mental number line, if I'm rounding to the nearest hundredth, rounding down 82 hundredths is going to be the nearest hundredth, rounding up 83 hundredths. Now the question is, where in this number line is 823 thousandths going to fall? So I take a little looky-loo at that thousandths place number. You know, we've all heard that 4 or less, let it rest, 5 or more, let it soar kind of a thing. And I see I have a 3 here. And definitely that 3 is going to put me not quite halfway between. It's going to be a little more toward that 82 hundredths. So I'm going to round to 82 hundredths. I'm going to let it rest. Now, let's try this without all the chartage. See if we can get there. So we have this number 22 and 187 thousandths. And again, we've been charged with rounding to the nearest hundredth. So first thing I'm going to do mentally is say to myself, okay, I got 2 in the tenths place, 2 in the ones place, got 1 in the tenths place, 8 in the hundredths place, 7 in the thousandths place. What do I know about this? I know that if I were doing a hundredths number line, I'd have 22 and then 18 hundredths that would let it rest, which means that the next hundredth up would be 22 and 19 hundredths. And I ask the question, where would my original number fall between here? Is it going to be less than halfway between or more than halfway to 22 and 19? Well, I see a 7. 5 or more means let it soar. That tells me that my original number is going to fall more than halfway. And I'm going to let it soar. I'm going to let it soar up to 22 and 19 hundredths. All right. I hope this is gelling for us. It's gelling for me. Are you gelling? I'm gelling. All right. Now, let's give this one more shot. Here, we've got decimal numbers, but we're being asked to round to the nearest whole number. I want you to remember when you see this, they're asking you to round to the ones place. Okay? No matter how long the number is, no matter how many digits, nearest whole number, they want the ones place. I don't know why they can't just say ones place. I am not in charge of math. I just get to explain it. All right. So I'm going to draw a place value chart this time, although I'm going to do a little cheat. I'm going to stick the 174 over here, and then I'm just going to rock the decimal portion, the 56 hundredths, over here. And I want you to keep in mind, yeah, here we got our tenths place, and here we got our hundredths place, and if we had something there, we'd have thousandths place. Again, we want to round to the nearest whole number, the nearest 1. Well, that means I'm either going to let it rest at 174, or I'm going to let it soar all the way to 175. So the question is my original number, 174 and 56 hundredths, less than halfway to 175 or more than halfway? Well, hey, guess what? If we take a look, we can see there's a 5 there. Well, 5 or more, we say let it soar. Plus, if we see 56 hundredths, well, 56 is more than halfway between. So that means we get to let this one soar. We round to 175. Now let's take a look at a number that's set up a little bit differently. We've got 9 and 821 thousandths. Again, we're rounded to the nearest whole number. So which place value is that going to be? Yep, it's going to be the ones place. So that means I'm either going to let it rest at 9 or I'm going to let it soar to 10. Those are the nearest whole numbers. 9.821 is going to be somewhere in between them. When I look to the next value to the right, the next largest value from the one I'm rounding, I see an 8 there. Ooh, 9.8. Now I can picture that on the number line, and that is going to be much closer to 10 than it is to 9 on that kind of number line. So that means, again, I'm going to let it soar. 5 or more, let it soar, as they say. All right. Not bad, not bad. Let's take one tiny detour into subtracting decimals. And this is, again, really about understanding place value and thinking about place value as we set things up and we move forward. So I see we have this expression, 83 and 2/10 take away 7 and 61 hundredths. And when we set this up, I got to tell you, just to be on the safe side, I recommend that you put your decimal places in before you start putting any digits anywhere, and you line them up. That helps remind you that we don't line up by digits, we line up by place value when we complete operations like addition and subtraction and multiplication. So I've got my decimals here, and I'm going to take my greater number, 83 and 2/10, and then I'm going to take my lesser number, 7 and 61 hundredths. And now everything's set up, and I can see the tens are in the tens place, the ones are in the ones place, the tenths are in the tenths place, and the hundredths are in the hundredths place. Now I can have a much better chance of being successful and accurate. Now before I start, I might be a little concerned about this hundredths place here that just looks empty. If that bothers you, or if it's helpful to you, and I know it is to me, put in a 0 placeholder. And so 82 and 2/10, you could use the equivalent, 83 and 2/10, you can use the equivalent of 83 and 20 hundredths. That will work just fine for our purposes. Now on to the subtraction. Well, actually, before I subtract, I like to also drop that decimal so that they're all lined up, like connect the dots. Here we go. So I see in the ones place, I'm being, or not in the ones place, in the hundredths place, I'm being asked to take 1/100th out of 0 hundredths, and I can't do that. I also notice in the tenths place, I'm being asked to take 6/10 out of 2/10, and I can't do that. I look at the ones place, and it's asking me to take 7 out of 3. I can't do that. But here's the good news. 83 and 2/10 is a pretty big number, so I can borrow from that tens place. I can borrow 10, and I can distribute that, regroup it throughout the other place values. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to ungroup or borrow 10 from the tens place, and I'm going to add those 10 ones to my 3 ones that I have here, and that's going to get me 13 ones. And that solves my ones place subtraction dilemma, but remember, I still need to regroup some value into my tenths and my hundredths to be able to complete this. So I'm going to have to ungroup one of the ones, leaving 12 here, and it's gonna that I'm going to regroup as 10 tenths, which equals 1. I'm going to add the 10 tenths to the 2 tenths, and I find I have 12 tenths. Again, my hundredths place now is good to go, or not my hundredths place, my tenths place, but my hundredths place still needs some value to be able to complete the subtraction successfully. So I'm going to borrow a tenth, and that I'm going to ungroup that and leave 11 tenths there. When I regroup it into the hundredths, it becomes 10 hundredths. And there are no other hundredths to add to that. It just goes to 10. So here we go. It looks a little sloppy, but now we have a much more reasonable equation to deal with. And we haven't changed the number at all. All we've done is rearranged and moved the values around in the same number. So let's start on the right in the hundredths place. 10 hundredths take away 1/100th leaves me with 9 hundredths. In the tenths place, 11 tenths take away 6 tenths. Leaves me with a difference of 5 tenths. 12 take away 7 is going to give me 5. And then 70 take away nothing is just going to be 70, right? So I have a difference of 75 and 59 hundredths. Now, I can take a page from all the whole number subtraction that I've done in 3rd and 4th grade and check this. If I take my difference and I add on my lesser number from the equation, I should get my greater number, 83 and 2/10, or 83 and 20 hundredths, however you want to think about it. So I'm going to do a quick check, because if I check it, I do not have to worry about having the teacher tell me what's right and wrong. I can prove it myself mathematically. And personally, I'm a big fan of being able to do things on my own when I can, being independent. I want you to be a big fan of that too. And it turns out, hey, we've got a very clear check here. This all works, which means that 75 and 59 hundredths is definitely going to work for us too. All right, really quickly, and if you want to pause, if you haven't tried this second problem, pause and try and set it up on your own based on place value, and then come back and check here. Okay, let's assume that you paused, and if you didn't, you can just watch, but it sure helps if you try these things yourself. So I have 102 and 3/10, and then I have 78, and you might be saying to yourself, well, 78 doesn't have a decimal, so I guess I just stick it here. And you would be crazy wrong, because remember, we don't line up by digits, we line up by place value. So I see this 78, 7's in the tens place, so I'm going to put the 7 in the tens place, line it up with the tens place of my other number. 8's in the ones place, I'm going to line that up with the ones place of the number I'm working with. And I may even then decide, hey, you know, I can use the decimal equivalent of 78, 78.0, and I'm good to go. All right, I'm going to drop that decimal so I don't have to worry about forgetting it, and I'm going to town. I see my tenths place is going to be no problem, but I notice my ones place, I have to take 8 out of 2, and that's not going to work out. I notice my tens place, I have to take 7 out of nothing, and that's not going to work out. So I'm going to have to go to my hundreds place and ungroup that 100 and regroup it as 10 tens to get started. And I've got to sort out my ones place here too, so I'm going to have to ungroup one of those tens, leaving me with 9 tens. And take those 10 ones, add them to my 2 ones, and they'll give me 12 ones. I don't have to do any more ungrouping and regrouping, because I can take nothing out of 3, right? And I get 3. If I take 8 out of 12, I have a difference of 4. And if I take 7 out of 9, I have a difference of 2. It looks pretty reasonable to me, although I could estimate to guess, to check the reasonableness, or I can add to check the difference. If I estimate to check the reasonableness, say on this one, I'm going to estimate 102, or maybe just 100. That's a lot simpler mental math, right? Take away 80. And that means, my answer should be about 20. My answer is about 20. I think I prefer adding to get an exact check, though. I hope this helped. Get an adult involved here. Check your work. Give them problems. Check their work. Have fun with it. And you'll get there.